Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Card Lounge podcast. It's your boy Robo Skills, and I'm here with,
Twice Baked Jake.
and we also have a special guest in the building. We have PokéRich. For the viewers that may be unfamiliar with who you are, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everyone, how's it going? I'm PokéRich, and I am a vendor content creator. We do a lot of Instagram as well as YouTube content, and we vend almost every single weekend. So we love creating community in the Pokemon space TCG and spreading good vibes. We want to obviously get more of the younger generation kids involved and everything like that. So,
Yeah, dude, I have noticed that. Like, whenever I see you vend at shows, and I feel like ever since I've been going to shows, I feel like I've seen, like your big booth setup. You always got one of the kind of main booth areas at like any of the shows I've seen you at, even at some of the first Collecticons. You always got like just families coming to your booths, like kids, like adults. How do you create such a kind of like warm and inviting booth space like that?
well, I definitely have to give a huge shout out to my fiance, Dom, who's in the room with us.
Yeah.
And she's a huge part of the PokéRich community brand and one of the leaders. And what Dom really brings into the space is that ability to create that connection with a lot of different people of all different ages. And we're both educators. I've been a youth motivational speaker for the past 11, 12 years now. Quit my job at Sony Pictures and decided to do something different and something a little bit more meaningful. So I went on that path, and then I also at the same time started getting back into Pokemon as well. I'm like, I'll tell you a little bit more about that, and ask me later. Ask me later about that. But yeah, it's been a great journey, and we love working with children and inspiring them to get into the hobby, do something that they're passionate about, and we also do host workshops at different card shows and things like that.
I absolutely agree.
awesome.
I've been to many different vending shows and card shows, and I see your booth, and it stands out miles away.
Yeah.
You have the largest banner, you have music, you have lights, and it's a completely different experience from the normal vendor table. So you guys stand out, and I think that's a really cool aspect is that when I go to a convention, I see, oh, there's Rich, and I know exactly where to head.
Yeah. I'm curious for you vending, or you know what? Let's take it back. I was gonna ask you when you started, like your first show ever and that experience, but even before that, when did you and Dom get back into the hobby? I'm assuming you collected like in the 90s, like probably
Right.
like us, and did you just stay collecting ever since you were a kid, or did you get back out and then had to go back into the hobby?
So I'm going to share a familiar story to many people.
Sure.
In my own way. When I was a kid, 5th grade, my brother was in 7th grade, and we played Pokemon.
Yeah.
But the thing is, my parents were very frugal, cheap, did not want us to spend any money on Pokemon cards. So we had to literally ask our friends, hey, can I have a free card? Like an energy card or trainer card. And we collected 10 of them, ended up trading that out for like a holographic Ninetales.
Oh, nice.
This
Sold
was the
it.
original trade-up challenge.
Yeah,
the
it was.
original Pokemon, yeah.
It was. Yeah, back in the day. So sold the Ninetales, $10, bought 2 booster packs, got a holo, and it kept trading up. And at the end of the year, guess how much my brother and I had in our collection?
Man.
As a 5th grader and 7th grader.
5th and 7th grader, had you collected the entire base set?
Yeah, it was during Base Jungle Fossil.
Okay.
That time, all in 1 year, 1999.
Gotcha. I'm sure you probably had one of every Pokemon. I mean, were you able to get every holo card as well? Or?
Yeah.
You were able
Yes,
to just
yes.
get them all.
We were hustlers, especially my brother. We ended up with a collection worth over $5,000
Dude.
as little kids.
And you remember it being that was the value even back then?
Yes.
Dude, I wasn't even like aware of
The value,
values
right,
as
of
a
the
kid.
cards.
That's
Yeah,
the
no.
earliest trade up chat. You probably invented
You know what,
the OG trade up challenge.
My brother was so invested because we struggled financially as a family. So my brother was very like, how can I make money to support the family? And for me, I'm the youngest, so I'm just like, I like Pokemon. This is fun. And my brother's like, sell your cards, make some money. So I made a little bit with it. So, but like most kids, Pokemon kind of died down, especially kind of around that high school time, and ended up literally just. I'm like, you know what? Spring cleaning, garage sale, grandma comes up.
Yeah.
How much for that? Oh, these are cool. I think I'm going to get them for my grandkid. I'm like, $80.
Yeah.
Here you go. And then there goes my whole entire collection.
Right. I mean, I feel like a lot of people either have the story of either not being able to find their original like childhood collection, or just at some garage sale when like I know I had at least a chunk of cards where when I was in high school, maybe early years of high school or later middle school, you kind of just didn't care about the Pokemon cards anymore. Even if you still played the games on the Game Boy, it's just like there was that phase where it's like, oh, you're too old to be collecting Pokemon cards. And then at some garage sale or some, like I think I gave a lot of them to one of my younger cousins when I got older.
Do you remember what set you jumped back in? What era you were going back into the hobby at?
So honestly, there's kind of like, I guess, three main parts to the journey. One was when I was a kid. Second one was I'd say around 2010. I didn't get back into like the newer stuff. I was kind of nostalgic and trying to get my old stuff back. So I went on eBay, Craigslist, whatever, and I just literally, at the time I was working a 9-to-5 job, and I'm just like, you know what? I miss Pokemon. I shouldn't have sold my collection. For me, it was a good chunk of money. I was trying to be conservative, and I mean, Pokemon wasn't that valuable at the time. Everything was super cheap. I put $500 in, bought about like 50 booster packs of base jungle fossil, some did I get maybe some first eds, and then went on Craigslist, bought some like hollows, things like that.
All that for $500.
$500, and literally I just put it in my closet. I'm like, these are just cool to have. I just want to have them just in case. Nobody knew Pokemon was going to blow up again like that.
You clearly made a great call. Yeah.
And 10 years later, we're Dom and I are in a relationship, and I'm like, let me check what the stuff is worth. So I pull everything out, kind of like comp it out. I'm like, whoa.
It's all gone. Yeah.
So that $500 investment turned into a $15K investment.
Right.
Yeah,
wow. Oh, yeah, because I guess if you got a couple first ed packs.
Yeah, and just a fun little fact here. In 2010, you were able to buy base jungle. Hold on, let me be more precise here.
Yeah,
jungle and fossil packs for about $5 each.
Right. They didn't climb at all in the period of 11 years.
$5. Wait, this was till
2010.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's insane.
Yeah, and then I remember I got shadowless blisters for like I think $50.
Okay, right. So a little bit more, but compared to today's prices, like what a steal. Yeah, I was 2010 I was in college. I wasn't even like thinking about Pokemon cards.
Do you remember how old you were when you were picking up stuff around 2010? Because I have a theory that basically around the age of like 20 or 25, when people start having a little bit of expendable income is when they pick up their collection again.
Ah, interesting. I would say 20. You know what? It was actually I gotta think about this. It might have been 2012. Now that I think about it, because it was 12. After college and when I was working.
Right.
So yeah.
So you had some expendable income, and you're like, you know what? I want my childhood again.
Yes, exactly.
And that's when you pick it up. Right, and that's when a lot of people do get back into the hobby, is when they have that expendable income and they kind of miss whatever they had as their child.
You know what? And that's true. I guess if you started with, Kanto region, like with Gen 1, right? That kind of were the years where we all were starting to enter the workforce and had that kind of adult money, but you're still young enough to be like, oh, I can buy things now. And it's like, yeah, I miss some of these things from my childhood. It's the nostalgia factor, right? So you can like go back in time and buy some of that stuff.
I love that you brought up the price on Jungle and Fossil, because that's not tracked anywhere. There's no price charting or market where you can go back to 2010 and be like, what's the price on a pack in 2010? But you remember that. It's purely based on collectors' experience and inside of their memory. I remember prices in 2020, 2015. It's not on any Excel spreadsheet or any price market. Most price market or price charting go back a couple of years. But now we have experience from people from 2005, 2010, what prices used to be. And you're absolutely right. I remember base set Charizard, it didn't move for 20 years pretty much. Is that in 1999, a base set Charizard was a $50 card. And in 2020, it was still a $50 card for a base set Unlimited Charizard. The first edition moved, but the Unlimited never really moved.
Right. And what's also interesting is the WotC Hollows. If you bought WotC Hollows 10 years ago, I think you did okay. Meaning, for the longest time, even in modern Pokemon history, just within the past few years, WotC Hollows have not been that big, and I still think they're very affordable right now. And obviously, they're starting to jump in prices. The PSA 10s, the Skyridge, all that stuff is starting to blow up right now. But I think there's still an opportunity in the market for vintage, and vintage is obviously a lot more stable. in
Right.
climbing. So.
I agree. I wonder why do we all think that, that I guess a lot of new hobbyists have come back into Pokemon, and there's just been this huge modern boom. You start to see it affect the vintage prices for certain, almost like certain Pokemon, for example, are experiencing huge spikes like the Gengar, the Umbreon, but then uh, another holo from that same set, like a Skyridge holo, Aquapolis holo, and just maybe a less popular Pokemon, you can still pick up for relatively cheap. But you
Right.
know how rare that getting that holo is still if you tried to pull it from the box. You know?
Right. And I think a lot of us have seen, I mean, we all have seen like the comparisons of like, why is this PSA 10 based at Blastoise the same price as this modern, the Magikarp, PSA 10?
Yeah.
Like it makes no sense. One is modern, the other one is, in my opinion, a Grail card.
Right.
Yeah.
We've talked about the population reports on some of these things. Is that for modern cards, it's very common for a modern illustration rare or SIR to have 10,000 PSA 10 copies. And we go back a little bit more vintage to Neo or E series. Some of those cards, there's less than 100 PSA 10s of those, and that's truly a tight supply.
Right.
Man, okay, so then take us back to when you started to get back in, you're spending this money, you're saying you looked at that little collection that you kind of like rebought back to, so you're like, I just want to have this, from my
Right,
childhood, and you realize it has jumped in value.
Right.
What's going through your head at that point? How old are you? Where are you at in life where then you start to go, can I buy more things, or do I want more in my collection before I think it goes up more? Like, where's your head at?
Yeah. So after checking out the comps and that 500 turning to 15K, like roughly,
That's a while.
I looked at it and I said, you know what? I have a lot of the kind of the same stuff. I have a bunch of WotC Hollows and I have a bunch of booster packs, and I want other stuff. I'd never owned a PSA Slab at the time, so obviously getting your first slab is very exciting.
Yeah.
And I remember actually going to a card party, the first one, and I barely went. Just like I almost didn't go.
Okay.
And had I not gone, maybe life would have been a little bit different.
Yeah.
But I went there, and I remember I just brought some booster packs. Had no intention of really. I didn't even know what I was going to do there.
Right.
I just brought my booster packs, and I said, you know what? First booth I actually stopped by. Funny enough, it was the Pokemon Network, Ken Lee.
Really?
Yeah. So I spoke to Ken Lee, and he had a bunch of just like
he's got so much
right
stuff. It's insane.
So he had boxes of just like 100 under slabs, things like that.
Yeah.
And I saw a lot of like Shadowless, and I'm like, I got to pick these up. And those were sentimental to me because for me, Shadowless has always been the chase for me. First edition was just way too expensive at the time, and so I remember just going in like, I got a Machamp, a Venusaur Shadowless, like a bunch of slabs because I just traded in, and I remember you took all the heavy packs.
Right.
But I kept a few. Made sure to keep a few, and I still have them in my collection because those are, although they're not my childhood sentimental, they're my 2012, 2010, 2012.
Right, it's a piece of your memory,
right, exactly.
of your experience.
Yeah. So I graded. I have a PSA 7 unlimited Lugia. I kept one card from my childhood. It was a Charizard.
Nice.
Unlimited. Yeah.
You know what? It's so funny. Outside of my binders, I also had the foresight for whatever reason as a kid. I segmented out a base set, Charizard, Venusaur, Blastoise, and the Raichu for just whatever reason.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah,
I
that's
still
exactly what
have
I have
those.
from Vintage as well. Is base set Charizard, Venusaur, and Blastoise, and that's what I have tracked on Collector, and nothing else from Vintage really.
Man.
It just gives me an understanding of where Vintage is at, because that's kind of like, if they moved, then all the other cards in Vintage, I know, like, oh, they also moved. or
That's
something
true.
of that
Yeah,
nature.
they're the base set starter, evolution. So I guess it's wild to think. Wait, so you're saying you only got your first slab at the first ever card party?
Yeah.
I thought you would have gotten slab. It's wild that you got those first initial packs and rebought some like old school vintage stuff from way before that, because I had slabs before the first card party, and and just seeing how much like inventory you have now, I would have thought you'd have been like deeper into the hobby at an earlier point than that first card party.
Yeah.
That means you kind of like got back in, well, a little later than me, but not really, because you also got that like, so when you bought that those initial vintage packs, did you look at any, like, were you aware of slabs, or were you getting any Pokemon cards in that time, or from then to Card Party, or just kind of keeping that collection like what it was?
That was like the starting point. I might have done a little bit of research, and I mean I wasn't in the whole COVID boom. Right. I thought about it. I tried little things, but then I kind of stepped away from it a little bit.
Okay.
So I just looked at a few things, but I think the Card Party was really that first initial push.
That's
back
interesting.
In. Yeah.
What was it about I feel like the COVID boom for a lot of people
Right.
made everyone dive in so deep because we
Right.
couldn't go outside, and
Right.
it was like, what else would we do? So for you, it wasn't like it didn't push you off the deep end to like
Right.
go into it
I
more.
actually was not like I heard a little bit about it.
Yeah.
But for me, I've always been a vintage collector.
Okay.
So that's why when all the modern stuff was coming out, I was
Boom.
like, okay.
I see. The boom was
Right.
more affecting of like the modern era.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But I think for a lot of us, I guess, people are in our age, in our 30s,
Mm-hmm.
we are looking at like our modern day, what do you call it? So we grew up with base jungle fossil, all
Yeah.
that stuff. And then now as adults, our re-entry, a lot of us is Sword and Shield.
Yeah.
So that's, I saw your ETB wall, everything like that.
Yeah.
For me, I love Sword and Shield. I mean, great artworks. I think it's a great balance. I think Scarlet Violet is cool. It's a bit modern. But everything's going to have its cycles, But Sword and Shield is nostalgic or meaningful to me just because it's the when I got back into it. So.
Right. So I understand why Rob is so shocked, because we've seen your collection and you have a very strong, robust collection. In fact, some of the cards on the screen on the table right here is part of your collection, and these are super cool.
Yeah.
So seeing your collection, Rob is thinking, oh, he's been collecting for a long time to have accumulated this, but it really showcases that even if you start collecting maybe a little bit later, you can still have a super robust and strong collection. So it's not too late for anyone out there if they want to start collecting today as their starting point.
Right.
You can get started right now and still have an awesome collection.
And I want to even tap into that a little more, because just from everyone I've met in the hobby, and even I'm trying to even think of like when I first met you, but I feel like we've known each other for a long enough time now.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I feel like your collection is indicative of like just I would have thought you would have definitely had slabs or been into slabs pre-Card Party. If you got your first slab at Card Party, what did you do from that day at Card Party till like your first time did you start thinking about, oh, I could vend at a show like this because you went to Card Party and saw like vendors like, Pokemon Network and stuff like that?
Not at all. I mean,
No. So, so tell us the story after Card Party.
Like most of us, we're all collectors.
Mm-hmm.
We love collecting, and I love collecting, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I want all these cards. I love the slabs. I want to get into it. So of course I'm doing whatever I can to increase my personal collection. I want bigger cards. I want that first edition Charizard. That was a big chase, and I remember the first time I got it, I thought I spent too much money on it. I mean, I got a great deal on it, but at the time, I'm just like, I'm spending thousands of dollars for this card. That's from my childhood that I've always wanted, and I remember feeling so excited. And at this point, it's like I've gotten a lot of them. So, but it's like you always got to respect the first edition Charizard. Yeah, that's OG. But for me, it's that collector's mentality. Of always chasing the next thing. And for me, that's another reason I love Pokemon. Pokemon to me is about personal development. It's about growth. It's that kind of like that hero's journey, or Pokemon's life. I love it.
It gives you quests.
It does.
As
I
you,
love
like,
it. It's amazing.
You have collecting goals, and you can like be working on 2 or 3, and then you start to focus on
or 5 or
and,
20 or
5. I know.
100.
Then it gets right. But then it's when there's a certain goal you have and you're like 90% completed, and then you're like hunting for those like, last like 2 or 3 pieces, and then you finally complete a collecting goal. It gives you such a good feeling.
Of course. Yeah.
Card Lounge will be right back after a word from our sponsor. A huge thank you to Collectr for sponsoring today's episode of the Card Lounge podcast. Collectr is the ultimate app to track value and manage your collection like a pro. Imagine this, you're at a card show and you need to know the value of a card immediately. You can scan the cards in seconds. Just point your phone and boom, the card name, set,
rarity, and price, you have all of the insight on the current state of the Pokemon card market in the palm of your hand. Want to know the value of your collection today? Collectr pulls live price data from real-time sales, so you're always locked in on the current market value. No more digging through sold listings. Your collection digitized and organized with zero hassle. With real-time portfolio tracking, you'll see your total collection value, daily movers, and price history over time. You can even add cards to your watch list so you remember what you wanted to pick up. Collectr also offers an amazing platform to show off your collection to others. You can even see my whole entire collection showcase on the Collectr app. Try out Collectr today. It's available for download on iOS and Android.
Were you able to transition from being or I guess, how did you transition from being a collector where you start these like collecting goals? Like tell us a little bit about what your collecting goals were when you sort of got bit by the bug again and kind of what you were searching for. And then how did you transition into being like a full-time kind of like vending at all these shows for Pokemon?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I got started, again, I went from my earlier goals when I got back in after trading the booster packs was I want to master set everything. You know, I had a bunch of holos, but I would just want to make sure I had sets, and I got I think I had base jungle fossil, and I had some duplicates. So I got some stuff personally graded, so that was kind of exciting to get my own cards graded. Kept a few for just nostalgic memories, even though they weren't super valuable. I had I had 4 Charizards on me. My one of them was my original one. I had 3 others that were in the binders, and I sent them all at the same time. They all got like sequential PSA 7s, like 777.
Dang.
So
Interesting.
I'm like, that's kind of cool. So I kept that to the side. But then I realized, there's no way for you to grow your collection unless you are making more money or figuring out some way to do that.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, I have extra jungle, like a full set. Let me try to sell this off. So I sold the whole set off for, a few $100s, took that few $100s, went back on whatever, OfferUp, Craigslist, these little, these websites, bought more collections. And then I'm like, okay, I want to collect and just trying to figure out how do you keep growing that, because even when you're taking in stuff, you're not always going to get like your PC stuff. But then if you get your PC stuff in and you hold it, then you got no capital.
The value sits, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So actually, when I got into the space and started doing more like collecting, blending into on my way to getting into the first show I ever vended, it was I just remember asking other collectors and people who had like Grail cards, things like that. I said, what's your biggest tip? And for me, I remember, I'll never forget, very simple tip, which is like, be willing to let things go. Yeah, because I was holding on to, I had a first edition Venusaur, and I was holding on to, I'm like, I can't let it go for, less than this.
Right.
And I realized if I want to keep growing my collection, I got to be willing to let it go.
Do you have duplicates? Because that's usually what a lot of collectors do, is that if you want a copy inside of your personal collection and you ever want to trade off a copy, most collectors have a spare.
Right. So this is, I love this space. It's amazing. I love that it's really about us as collectors. I love seeing all the different vendors, and I know there's a huge vendor boom and everything like that. And I love being able to have different kind of strategies of like how to collect and grow the collection. There's certain things like the first edition Venusaur I had. I actually don't personally own a first edition Venusaur right now. But it's because I'm working on different things.
Right.
I
feel like you could get one if you wanted it.
And that's exactly the point.
Right.
The thought is, can I get this card again? And it was I'm a PSA 10 collector.
Okay.
So, if I get a PSA 9 first edition Venusaur, I'm not going to keep it because that's not what I want.
You're just going to go for the
Right.
10. Oof.
Right.
Those are expensive.
Yes.
Yeah.
So for me, it depends on like the Venusaur. I'm like, you know what? I'm willing to let it go. I don't have a duplicate of it, but it's going to forward me to my goals. The Shining Gyarados that you see right here, that's a example of, and another thing I learned, with vending is, a lot of people say like your showcase is your PC, you know, like don't have like a PC, but I'm a collector,
Yeah.
you know, so I try to have both. Yeah. So, I mean, this is an example of one of those things like that is, you know, low pop, 120, and it's something that is definitely my PC, and I'm gonna have a very hard time letting go just because it's so low pop and one of my big chase cards.
Right.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of comments talk about this exact card and saying, "Hey, I want a copy." And I know this card specifically is a Grail card for a lot of people. It's like their ultimate chase. So it's great that you have a card like that inside of your collection that I can say like, "Hey, I'm one of 120 people that own this card out there." That is so cool because we talk about like the population report for some modern cards, and we're talking about 30,000 PSA 10, 20,000, 25,000, 36,000. These are crazy amounts of populations that people are talking about for modern cards.
And people think that those numbers are like it's funny to hear about a lot of the new people coming into the hobby, what they view as like low pop, you know,
Right.
with cards in the thousands. And, you know, it's probably because they just, some people just forget a lot of the vintage cards and how truly low of a population like some cards are, especially in a 10. And you have a great, like, this is like a Grail card because it has a great story behind, you know, was the shiny red Gyarados is the first shining like Pokemon card, right? The first time, and I guess the Magikarp and the Gyarados came out with the same set, but it's like those are the rookie shiny Pokemon cards, you know? It's like,
and they're also the only two shining cards with the full holo. After that, they made them all just the Pokemon is
right.
shiny.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, they have like a full holo, like the holo foil in the background.
So speaking of the market right now, what are you seeing as a collector and as a vendor? Are you seeing some stuff come to your table more often, or are you seeing some stuff coming less? What would you say is hot or desirable right now?
Right now, I mean, definitely all the not the ultra modern stuff. You know, I think everything that's hot right now is going to be XY Sun and Moon era right now. So
Interesting.
yeah, tag teams, megas. I think, in my opinion, megas are kind of starting to slow down a little bit. That's my opinion. I think they're still hot, but I think tag teams are really hot right now.
I see. Yeah. I'm getting the same sense as well, just from, you know, keeping my ear to the ground.
So the funny thing is that's what I see as well, is that basically the tag team hype, I would say, is real. It's not based on speculation.
It's real.
But the mega hype for the last couple months, it's based on speculation of megas returning, and so people are picking them up predictively, expecting it to be higher up or more desirable.
I can also see a more steam being put in that engine when like the mega sets drop, because then the new megas are here, and it's almost like, why tag team? I remember when we were exiting the Sword and Shield era, it's like, to a lot of the ultra modern collectors in the hobby, or that people that came in, that's kind of the first switch of thinking of vintage being more important. But to go all the way back to like, you know, true vintage, it's kind of almost jarring, or, you know, in a way, I guess a lot of the 10s almost seem out of reach, like unless you're really rich, you know what I mean?
You're talking about vintage 10s.
Like vintage, yeah. Like if you talk about like your WotC era stuff, right?
So I actually want to make a comment about that.
Yeah.
And, you know, this is one of those, as a vendor, this is one of those balances, because if you want to keep growing your business, when you grow your business, you're growing your collection too, right? So by not fully investing and putting all your money into your PC, like being very intentional about it.
Right.
So for me, as I'm vending, and, you know, I mean, this is a tip for other people as well. If you're into vintage, like, pick it up right now.
Yeah.
Because especially the, let's say, PSA, I'm even talking about like PSA 10s, Gym Challenge, Gym Heroes, Team Rocket, things like that. Last year, I mean, I had people, you know, watch the table and you know, PSA 10s, and I'm sure you're aware of this too. When you look at, let's say I had Steelix from Neo Genesis, come to the table, unlimited, PSA 10, you know, it's pretty low pop.
Yeah.
And it came to the table, I comped it out, $150. I'm like,
in what world is that $150?
how does that make sense?
Wait, really? The holo was 150?
Yes.
No way. For the Steelix?
Yeah.
In
A
10.
year ago. I'm
year
assuming
ago.
it's a little bit more expensive.
little bit
now.
more.
It's gotta be, but that's crazy.
But the thing is, it's still so affordable.
I guess you know, okay, and I see what
so
you're
if
trying
anyone
to say.
has
Yeah.
those, bring them my way, and I'll take them for you.
Yeah,
you
Rich
know,
will
like,
take 'em.
I love them. I love things that are like, I'll PC things like that because they're not super expensive, but you know, they're nostalgic to me too.
Right.
You know, I love that kind of stuff. So
Okay, and you know what? So outside of the like one thing I don't have in my collection is a base unlimited Charizard. I have it in a 9, but the 10 is so much more expensive than a 9. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I guess I could afford to get it, but it'd be such a huge kind of, I don't know, dent in the wallet, you know? And so I get this sense that a lot of people feel like for certain heavy hitter cards, maybe not every Pokemon in every set, even like the holos or what would be considered the hits, but certain Pokemon from certain sets in a 10 just seems so out of reach for certain vintage sets that I do feel like if you got back in, especially in 2020 for like the Sword and Shield era, you have this thought of like trying to at least understand vintage from the aspect of rarity. And I feel like a lot of people, because I remember having this thought too, and if I'd have leaned more into it, I'd have a lot of more, I'd have a lot more Sun and Moon tag teams, because I remember thinking the rainbows, the tag team stuff in a 10 were kind of undervalued. In fact, I remember when GXs were like like people thought Sun and Moon stuff was kind of, I don't know, like whack, like
Yeah,
while
we talked
Sword and
about
Shield
something
was
like
going
the
on.
Gengar and Mimikyu, the ultra rare tag team GX.
Yeah.
We talked about how that was a $4 regular ultra rare, and a PSA 10 it's going for over $1,000 right now.
Which is insane, you know, and it kind of makes me feel like people still have access to Sword and Shield boxes because that's when Pokemon started to ramp up printing, you know, in the Sword and
Right.
Shield era, and they haven't really toned it back down to like anything pre-COVID, right? Like COVID set like this a new bottom floor line. And so it just makes me think, well, where was printing at and where was collecting at before that ramp up? And it was the Sun and Moon era. So I think you just have a lot of people having this thought of like, all right, what is vintage or what is going back to collect rarity? Well, I don't just see a bunch of Sun and Moon like Team Up or Unified Minds or, you know, these packs or boxes that readily available. So when you look at some of the hits or the slabs from that era, it does kind of make sense that you can buy a 10 and it's still under 1,000 and it's like relatively attainable to collect every card in the set, even the best hitters in the set. Whereas when you go back to, you know, super vintage, I mean, not that Sun and Moon is vintage, but you know, it's past,
Right.
that's kind of seen by, I think, more folks as like almost just so out of reach. So I'm not even going to bother with it in a way. Does that make sense? Yeah, and so and I think that's why a lot of the like modern collectors now, you see all the Sun and Moon stuff, they're focusing on that because they view it as still attainable and it's still undervalued.
Sure, I absolutely agree. And I think a lot of, like, even vintage is still quite attainable. And it
Yeah.
shows that because a lot of the cards that you pick up inside of your collection, you attained them within the span of the last 2 years, which means you attained them quite recently. So I think a lot of our viewers would love to know more about that, is because they would like to replicate or learn a little bit from you, is what are your tips and tricks for how were you able to accumulate your large, robust collection? Because I think they would love to know, how can they get a Poncho Pikachu or a first edition Gyarados themselves?
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, it's, you know, it's one of those, as a vendor, we do have a little bit more, I guess, exposure, the ability to collect things. And I think that's part of the reason why there's such a, you know, a huge hype around vendors and everything
Bingo.
in the past year, or actually past few months, really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, definitely in the last year, it's just steadily
Right,
getting
right,
more and
right.
more. Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys are like little mini celebrities at conventions. It's very cool.
Yeah, no, it's fun. You know, when I talk about like picking up the Steelix, and I have a few more of those vintage cards, because I'm not talking about the let's say like a first edition Dark Charizard PSA 10. You know, like that card is spiking. You know, or let's say a Sabrina's Gengar. Those cards are spiking. I'm talking about the less popular ones, like let's say Erica's Clefable's another example. I picked it up first edition. I picked it up, I think, with the market was like $400
A 10.
in a 10.
Yeah, that's a great.
And
It
you
did-
sold it for
No, no, no.
significantly more?
I did not sell it.
Oh, you
I'm
still have
keeping
it.
that.
Keep it.
Okay, that's a personal collection.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, this is my strategy. And, you know, again, if you have any PSA 10 first edition, unlimited, vintage, bring it this way.
Yeah.
Don't keep it for yourself. I'm just kidding. But I love that because it doesn't cost a lot and it's so nostalgic. I'm a PSA 10 collector. So might as well pick them up while they're cheap.
Yeah.
You know, now's a good time to do that while the market is still, you know, good, or bring it to my table, whatever. And then in terms of growing that collection and, you know, how do you get to cards like this? It's, again, as a vendor, you know, you have these occasionally walk up to your table or maybe going to trade night, things like that. But it's all about just vendors. Obviously we take things in at a percentage, and then or and then we sell closer to, like, let's say 90 to 100 or whatever it is.
Right.
So that's kind of doing that, repeating that over and over again. That's kind of how you get cards like this.
You just churn. So did you have these cards walk up to your table and you bought them at a good price and you're like, I'm going to PC them? Or did you just have a lot of stuff walk up like a Erica's Clefable and a 10, realize, oh, this is severely undervalued for what it is and how rare it is, and take in a lot of that where you like churned those cards to kind of gain a lot more personal wealth to be able to purchase cards like these?
Well, these cards actually came to the table.
Okay, so just big hitters like this can come to
and
your
I mean, obviously these don't come every day. These are
right.
Very obvious great cards. Love them both, modern and vintage. And a lot of times you get what you get, and then you work out deals. And obviously you want to find people who, let's say, are interested. Let's say I have a Latios Latios, which is a great card, big chase card. And someone has a vintage, I don't know, like a Skyridge something, let's say Gengar, and they already completed all the Skyridge stuff. So they're willing to let their Skyridge Gengar go for Latios and, maybe some other stuff.
Right.
And for me, we both know it's a lot harder to get a PSA 10 Skyridge Gengar versus a Latios.
But someone would rather have the Latios
right.
than the Gengar. So you're just finding those people and then using your knowledge of, what's rare and what you just personally like more, are facilitating those trades
right.
and doing it at a high level, because some people are bringing high level stuff to your, man, this is why vending is cool. I'm glad we did so we all did the Las Vegas card show
right.
together. That was really like Jake and I's first foray into, vending. That's fully awesome. Like from start to finish, like a full show. And it was really fun,
Yeah.
Like I look forward to doing more, shows, because I think it is cool as a collector how much kind of random stuff can come up to your table. And you're vending so much more now, or at least since I've met you, I feel like, I don't even have to try to see you at shows. I just expect that you'll be there. And then we'll always talk or hang out a little bit at each show. But what was the first what was the first moment you had the thought of like, okay, I'm going to vend a show and I'm going to take it seriously? And then how did you set up for, what show was that?
It was, let's see, it was earlier on in, like, I guess, so Card Party was obviously the first one. The first Card Party was the first show I did, attended.
That you just went to as a even attendee.
Yeah. And I would attend a lot of different shows and, do trades and everything like that. And I kept attending a few more. And eventually I realized, maybe I should try this. And obviously if you're going to vend, it costs money.
Yeah.
So you have to make sure you have something to sell. Otherwise you might it might not be worth it, so to speak.
Right.
So it took a little while to get there, but once I had enough, I started vending at local shows. The barrier to entry is a lot easier, where it's maybe less than $100 to get a table. So that was kind of my first exposure. From there, eventually I committed to doing, let's say, more regional shows, and then, I mean, I was able to booking a table for Collecticon and, like front rows, things like that, back then was a lot easier than it is today.
Yeah, right.
Today, it's so hard to get tables.
Well, it's like being a vendor. I feel like you and a lot of other, even previous guests we've had on just have made it so popular. Like everyone sees it as almost like a little bit of a cheat code for some of the stuff we've been talking about, like even right now. And then, people are going to watch this podcast and feel like they want to vend even more. But, were you getting tables at Collecticons easily when did you do your first Collecticon?
That's a great question. I want to say probably, a few months after that first card party.
See, and that's why, if someone had asked me, oh, you've seen Rich at Collecticon before the first card party ever, I would have just been like, yeah, I've seen him, because I've probably been to, I don't know, like 20 Collecticons before the first card party. So it's, in my mind, it's like you've just been a part of that scene for so long. But you really haven't, which is so shocking, So it's like, even, in that first one, you just got like did you have your full setup you usually have? Or
no.
You just did a table?
Yeah, it was just a table. and
How'd that show go for you?
I think it was good.
Okay.
Yeah, I think most shows overall do pretty decent. And I just remember being able to, like, I probably connected with someone, and I think Wes was probably one of the first people I met at a Collecticon.
Same.
Yeah. So I remember just building those connections, because it's definitely hard to buy a table when you're getting started versus, let's say, making some friends and then working with them.
Then so did you and that's I know Wes pretty well.
Right,
so it's like
course.
I've known him since some of the early, maybe like second or third Collecticon ever, and that's when we met. So it's kind of like when you met him, you're like, oh, if you get this island, if you have space in your island, like I'll vend with you or something like that.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Card Lounge will be right back after a word from our sponsor.
KantoShark!
KantoShark has been selling over $1 million in Pokemon cards every month, and the momentum is not slowing down.
They've had multiple record-breaking sales, including a Gold Star Rayquaza PSA 10 sell for $80,000 and a first edition PSA 9 base set Charizard sell for $40,000. Those are the kind of record-breaking sales that you can expect from KantoShark.
Jake, I saw on KantoShark they had 4 sets of Poncho Pikachus, all PSA 10, like the whole collection, just sell week after week after week.
That's right, Rob. And right now, KantoShark is open for high-end Pokemon card consignment. If you have any cards over $500 or more, then consign it with KantoShark. And let's face it, there's a lot of cards out there that are valued at over $500 right now.
If you're looking for Poncho Pikachus, big Pokemon Grails like Gold Stars, Crystal Charizards, first edition Holos, you gotta check out KantoShark.
Getting started is simple. Just message at KantoShark with photos of what you've got and they'll take it from there. Whether you're looking to buy, sell, or consign, there's never been a better time to work with one of the most trusted names in the hobby, KantoShark. Thank you again to KantoShark for sponsoring today's episode of the Card Lounge podcast. Okay, so I'm absolutely with you. I think vending is super cool. I almost see conventions now as like a larger playground.
Yeah.
You guys see what I mean? It's just a place for people to play and trade cards. And that is something that is really cool, is that the velocity at which you're trading cards is a lot faster than most other collectors. Is that a card might be in your hand for a week or two before it gets transacted. For a lot of other collectors, they may be holding on to cards for years. And the speed between each transaction is how you're accumulating that margin. Your margin's a little bit higher because you're able to trade cards much faster than the average collector, because you're even in the playground that they're not there.
You're in the actually, Jake. That's
like
what
that
it was. I like that analogy. I see it now, because it was almost like, even when I was attending Collecticon, I'm not. I guess I was at the playground, but I'm also like creating content and making like videos and doing things. But as a vendor, you're like the kid on the playground set up at the table, like when everyone else is playing, like kickball or running around the jungle gym. You're just trading and facilitating like buys and sells and trades, and just at a much higher velocity than just anyone else in the hobby that's not going to these shows.
Yeah.
So if you go to enough of them, your ramp up must just be so much faster than the average everyday collector, and just being able to keep building your collection the way you want. Almost.
And Rich has experience seeing the cards go through his tables, that basically you might see 4 Latios and Latios in a single show, but you might only see 1 Sabrina's game card. So if they're both the same value, you say, okay, I'm going to keep the one that I only see 1 copy of.
Right.
And he's constantly getting those knowledge things and making moves and transactions based on them. Would you say like that is like a lot of your mentality when you're, I don't know, going into a show? You're always trying to, you're taking in the knowledge of how you see most people moving, and you kind of are maybe not moving in the opposite direction, but using that knowledge and optimally making decisions, I guess.
Yeah, I think, and again, this is another reason why I love Pokemon. I love this space. It's a lot of it's personal growth. It's being able to work on ourselves, and how can we grow ourselves? How can we see different angles? And again, this is why I love all these different vendors' perspectives.
Yeah.
Because I'll be real, like for me, I didn't catch the whole mega boom like right when it happened, because I was focused on something else. I had a different strategy. I was realizing that while the mega boom was happening and people were capitalizing on that, I had a few megas. That's cool. But vintage. There was a spot in like ultra modern for me, so that worked for me. So whether you're a vendor or collector, you just gotta kind of figure out what works for you. I noticed some vendors for the past several years, like they don't even do modern; they just do vintage, even when vintage was not hot.
Right.
Because modern's been hot for the past few years, and vintage is like not, people were like avoiding it. But I talked to these vendors and they said, you know what? I do vintage because I like doing vintage and it works for me. I have a client base because they know I have all the vintage and it works, and then now look at them now.
Yeah.
Everyone's back into vintage,
Right. It's very interesting because I did not expect to see a vintage boom, but that's what we're kind of seeing right now is that I would say 4 or 5 months ago, it was a modern boom where modern illustration rares were going for hundreds and thousands of dollars when they really weren't that rare. And in the past 2 or 3 months, I'm seeing the vintage boom is that vintage cards that didn't really see that much action in the past couple of years are now going for double or triple in the span of months.
As it should be.
Well,
I mean,
Rich has been calling this out for a long time.
it's true. I see what you're saying by that. You're like, as it should be, because it's like, were these prices high, but were they as high as they deserved for some of these vintage grails?
Right. Absolutely not.
Given how rare they are and comparing them to prices of modern Pokemon cards that are also rare and hard to pull, but were printed a lot more. It's almost like you're really talking about a lot of and not that you come off this way, but I'm sure you're aware of a few of them, like the the hardcore vintage collectors that they just see all modern Pokemon as trash, and like they just like couldn't believe that anyone would collect any modern Pokemon cards because there's so much of it. And I think I get what they're trying to say though, is like, they just see the population of some of the older stuff, and it's just so much rarer, right? And when things are rare and enough people want them, eventually there's enough of a delta in the like supply and demand where you got to just respect the price. Like you got to think, oh, this price should be way more because of how hard it is to get, kind of.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that disconnect. Is that you're saying this card? There's a population report of it of 120 copies, and at a certain point, a couple of Umbreons could have purchased that card. Like 2 or 3 Umbreons would have been comparable to this card. And you would say, hey, this card is way cooler than 3 Umbreons. So even though their prices are the same, you would never trade this card for 3 Umbreon VMAXs, for instance. Even though
maybe 20 of them.
Price the same.
20 of them you would.
So then I can go hopefully buy another one.
Right. And it's funny, you could probably go to a show and see enough booths. Like if you go to a big show, you could find 20 Moonbreons in the show.
Right.
Maybe, all right, that's a lot. Like, but 3 certainly, or 4 or 5. And you'd be hard pressed to walk around and maybe find, we know people, but like just the average booth to have that in a 10. There's a difference, and that's the rarity. That's wild. The price of this is you were talking about a little bit before the pod. It's jumped how much in the last month?
The price of it has doubled from the last sale to the sale that just closed recently.
Okay, and what were those prices?
So it was at 5K, and then it just jumped to 10K.
And I absolutely agree with you. 5Ks is insane. Because that's almost comparable to an Umbreon VMAX, which is around 3,000. Are you telling me that for 2 Umbreon VMAX, I can pick up this card? And I would say if you put them on a scale, I would prefer this over 2 Umbreon VMAX in terms of how desirable they are.
Right. You could trade 2. Oh my
and it's
gosh,
not a jab at Umbreon VMAX. We're just using it as a comparison because everyone knows its value. It is a really cool card.
It's a Pokemon currency.
But if it's $3,000, this has to be comparable in some level.
That is kind of, like 5K. See, I would feel like for the one card, that's a lot. But then if you see how much someone would pay for 1 Moonbreon in a 10, you're like, is this just undervalued, or is the Moonbreon like severely overvalued? And maybe it's a combination of both.
Right. And we see stuff like Mario Pikachu or Poncho Pikachus are now going for more. They're 10,000. And they have a population report of, say, 2,000 copies. And you're saying this is 120. There are so many cards like that where you're talking about that Steelix, for instance, where the population reports for some of these cards, there's 97 PSA 10, 95 PSA 10. They are so few, you could go years without ever seeing another sell.
Right. So then take this back to a card that you just mentioned before. Do you feel like Erica's Clefable in a 10, like the first edition, should be worth. Was that a first edition you were referencing?
Yeah, it was a
Or-
first edition.
Okay. Do you feel like that card should be $4,000 or just more than what it's worth like right now?
Definitely more than what it was worth when I got it. I think maybe about a year ago or so.
Okay.
I think the market has start to catch on.
Yeah.
I remember, I think a couple of years. It's funny. I use Collectr. No plug.
Yeah.
I'm in. What do you call it? Not sponsored. There we go.
Right.
They do sponsor us.
I know.
It's fine. Yeah,
I
so
know.
we,
Sponsored,
shout
not
outs to
sponsored,
Collectr.
whatever.
Yeah.
Hit us up. So we got. I checked the price on Collectr. Because it's in my PC. It's not going to come out of it. So I checked it a few months ago. I saw it jumped to 650, and I recently checked it. And it says 1,000. So I think 1,000 is definitely like the baseline of what a first edition PSA 10 vintage card should be. And I mean, there's plenty of WotC first editions that are under 1,000 easily.
Yeah.
We're talking 500 to 1,000 probably right now. So
Do you notice I guess a trend in like what's coming to your booth now is different from maybe like what was coming to your booth 6 months ago?
that's a good question. I think that inventory is always changing. I think that for the most part, I would say overall it's fairly similar. Yeah. We're still getting plenty of the more modern cards. And then, you have the occasional vintage cards as well, mid-eras, everything like that. So
Okay, so when you're selling at a table, have you noticed that singles or raw cards are trading at hands a little bit more often than graded cards or anything of that nature?
that's a really good question. I think it really depends on what show it is.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's going to be the raw cards. Sometimes it's going to be the slabs. I think it also kind of depends on what kind of vendor you are and I guess the reputation. Overall, I think most collectors will collect raw cards because they're just easier. People like to master set them, everything like that.
Right.
So there's that aspect. And then people who are like, I don't want to say more serious, definitely not more serious
I get what
collectors,
you
but
mean.
just more
There's
like
a word for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like more prestigious because it's not
Right.
like if you don't collect slabs,
Exactly.
you're unprestigious.
Right.
But just that word, yeah.
I almost want to say like more like OCD or something, but that's not even the right word. It's just
That
like
one-
they
yeah.
just like slabs.
Right, because it's
Sealed.
yeah, well, and the card is authenticated, and
Right,
you
right,
just know
right.
it's protected. Yeah, I'm sure there's some perfect SAT word for that, but we
Yeah.
know what you're trying to say.
All right, SAT students, let us know what
yeah,
that word is.
What are we thinking of? Yeah.
Like I do pick up a lot of singles, but I understand what you're saying is that when you pick up a single, you now have to take it out of the case. They have to look at the card, flip it back and forth, look at the condition. If I pick up a PSA 10 or PSA 9, I know exactly the grade in front of me. I don't have to look at it. And it just depends on the collector. Some prefer singles and some prefer graded right now. And it definitely depends. So as a vendor yourself, would you say that your niche, and it's based on our conversation for the past hour, you'd say you're more of a vintage niche?
So as a vendor, we try to have everything.
He's got everything.
Yeah. So we have the moderns, we have the vintage, and we also have, we do raw cards as well. So mix of both. Of course, I'm always a vintage guy. So I like the vintage, but right now in the market, they're both very healthy, vintage and modern. So we definitely like having both.
Would you say that you are more okay with a lot of, I guess, the modern coming in? It's a lot easier for you to churn that and let those pieces go, and like you get a Moonbryon in, you're like, oh, I'm ready to sell this right now to someone if they want to pay full price for it, and it's not until like a vintage kind of hitter comes to your table, well, I guess where maybe you're like, oh man, like okay, if someone wants to buy this, I could let it go, or if I really need this, I could just slide this over to the PC and like kind of extract that from there.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Okay.
I think, moderns, Moonbryons, again, you could always replenish those, Lugias, all those. So if someone wants it, they'll take it, keep moving.
Sure. Very cool. So, Rich, we're getting near the end of the podcast. While we have you here, are there some cards that you want to call out, or any cards that you would say are underrated or very cool, or things that you just want to add to your collection? What are you currently chasing?
Well, those are a few different questions. What am I currently chasing, or
what are some of your okay, yeah,
Big
what are some
chases
of your
or-
chases? Yeah,
Okay.
like your collecting goals.
So, okay, so a few things. I think on a more personal level, the I guess the master set I'm trying to complete right now is a PSA 10 master set of Shadowless base set. Yeah. So I mean that's, after I complete that, maybe we'll do the first editions. We'll see. But Shadowless again is very sentimental to me growing up. So that's kind of what I like collecting. Besides that, the next kind of Grail card would be the PSA 10 first edition Charizard, and then
You're going for one of those?
yeah, I mean it's gonna happen.
Okay,
It'll happen.
I believe in you.
Yeah,
I think you could do it.
And then after that, it's gonna be Illustrator Pikachu.
Have you seen any of those come to your table? Has there ever been a point where someone actually put down like a $200,000 first edition Charizard and you had to pass on it?
Not that specifically.
Okay.
Yeah.
So while we're still on that topic, sorry.
Oh.
You want to go?
I was gonna say, because you asked something interesting. I just want to twist it a little bit. Has anything ever come to your table that was so big that you would have wanted to pick it up, but you were like, oh, this is out of my price range right now.
Yeah.
I can't even make this work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've had some pretty big cards, and it's stages. It's like cards that were big back then, maybe today makes more sense. So, I mean, I think a year or two ago, we've had some, I don't know, some obviously like the family trophy Kangaskhan, like things like that come to the table, and at the time it didn't really make sense, so we just let it go. Or
would that make sense now? Like if a trophy Kangaskhan came to your table?
Yeah.
Oh man.
Would you consider that like still liquid? Is that something that you regret not picking up at the time, or is there a recent deal where you're like, dang, I wish I had picked that up?
No, I mean, at the time it didn't make sense.
You just
so
couldn't even
it was cool, but now it's like, okay, when you're at, it's all kind of like levels and where you're at.
Yeah, you're leveling up. Then, it's funny with what he just said. Has there ever been a time that not regret, but it's like you could have picked something up, but maybe you felt it was speculative, or you're kind of like, we'll pass on this. And then later you were like, you know what? I should have picked that up.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Stories like that.
I mean, look, I think the most speculative items. So,
yeah,
it's like
these.
Usually I don't regret decisions I make. Meaning, I try to be more. I guess I'm more like calculated, or I don't take huge risks.
Okay, you seem analytical.
Yeah. Like for example, we talk about the Magikarp. Magikarp is when that card was going up like over 1,000. Or another good example is going to be the Charmander Obsidian Flames Pokemon Center.
Right, the Pokemon Center promo card.
I
because
do
that card's
not
thousands of dollars.
understand why that card is so expensive. It does not make sense
It's
to
the
me.
stamp premium.
People like their stamps.
People have brought that to the table, and
You had to pass on it.
I'm passing.
Man.
Because it's way too high.
Okay.
It doesn't. There's too much risk in it.
I see.
Not enough reward for it.
Right.
Can it go up? Sure, but no.
I see. No, I think that's a great example of one. Yeah.
So we've talked about this as well, is that there's basically, the market says it's worth $2,000, but as a vendor, you aren't willing to pay 80% of market because you disagree with where things are currently at. So your intuition as a collector is to say, no, that's not for me.
Right. And I know other guests have said this, and we all kind of know when a new set releases, prices are always high. And as vendor, it's like I try to stay away from that overall until it kind of mellows out a little bit.
Interesting. So for something like Destined Rivals right now, Destined Rivals is really hot because it's the most recent set. A lot of people must be going to your vending table asking for Destined Rivals or willing to trade in Destined Rivals.
Right, yes, of
How
course.
long into a set cycle would you start picking up those cards?
Great question.
So there's a few things. If I want to pick it up, I might pick up something from, let's say, Destined Rivals if I know it's going to move the next show. And it's more, honestly, sometimes we just take in cards just so people have access to them. And it's like we may or may not make money off of it. It's there available.
And it provides that interaction, a positive interaction
exactly.
at your table with someone where it's like, oh, maybe that puts in their head, oh, they'll come back and get something else.
Right. And if we're talking about more like from an investment or vendor standpoint, it's like, honestly, I just let it cool down to maybe usually about 3 to 5 weeks, somewhere around there, where it kind of mellows out a little bit more.
So this is something that I've talked to viewers about at the same time, is how old does a set get before you say, okay, the market has fully settled for a set?
Let's see. Fully settled. Okay, let's talk about Scarlet Violet right now.
Sure.
So
Yeah, let's talk.
fully settled. I mean, is it ever fully settled? If we're real. We talked about back to the Magikarp. Paldea, like when does it actually settle? We got to look at reprint cycles, everything like that. But I think if we're talking about like moderately settled, you know, for now. Probably off the initial hype, like 1 to 2 months usually.
Interesting.
I would have thought longer.
Yeah, I would have picked a little bit longer too, but I would understand where you're coming from. Is that after 2 months, the prices has gone to the point where okay, you can pick up a card and know that it's not going to jump up or jump down 50%.
Right. Okay, that amount. Yeah, and a lot of the injected fanfare hype from any set, like especially from people just like before a set drops, you know, there's just so much built-in hype that kind of dies down like 2 or 3 months after set release.
So, are you collecting any modern, or are you completely off the modern market?
I was wondering that too.
So moderns, what years are we classifying as modern?
I would say Sword and Shield, Scarlet and Violet right now, at least.
I'd include Sun and Moon in that.
Sun and Moon?
too.
I mean, if we're including Sun and Moon, then, I mean, so the big chase card is Latios Latios for me. You know, I've had it multiple times. The thing is, I've always sold them. I mean, I sold a lot of them when they were lower. Right. So, I mean, they're higher now. And as a vendor / collector, for me, it's like I always, you know, I try not to pay, you know, like full or like get something that makes sense to put it away, you know, because if I'm putting like 100% in, then it's hard to take that out of the inventory to keep growing. So I would say Latios Latios, I gotta re-get that back. And if I get it back, depending on the situation, I might have to move it again, or I might keep it because it's going to keep going up. So.
Right, and I mean, it is funny. There are just collectors out there that I know that, like, I guess really just want to get as many of that in a 10 as they can. Like Anthony, I feel like has like a ton of those, like at least 10 of them or something like that. But you would want one of those in your collection.
Yeah.
Okay, right. But not so badly that you would pick one up and then just completely remove that value from your inventory.
Right. It's because we know Latios Latios are still out there. You know, if it's vintage, it's probably going to stay in.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And boxes of, I mean, well, they're getting expensive now, but you could still rip. You know, there's still supply that can be opened to make more population of Latios.
Right. Of
Latios.
course.
Yeah.
I fully understand what you're saying, which is that basically Latios and Latios is comparable to this price of this card. And if you hang them up again, I would prefer this one over the Latios and Latios purely based on the supply and the prestige of the two cards. I would say this card is way cooler as a flex to have inside of your collection because of how rare it is compared to any other modern cards. So you talked about the Latios and Latios. Is there any other cards from Sword and Shield or Scarlet and Violet that you've actually been interested in from the last like 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, because I started Sword and Shield, you know, there are definitely. Look, you gotta have you gotta have a Moon Kitty, you know.
I know. So it is funny that Sword and Shield.
There are a few cards that I have in my PC, and I mean, I got them when they were low.
Yeah, nice.
So I was able to kind of like put that aside. You know, the Rayquazas, obviously the Gengar, things that are super common, but to me, I'm gonna at least keep one because they're sentimental because this is kind of like the start of PokéRich, you know.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so that's meaningful to me.
Very cool.
Yeah. And the ones that I PC personally are the ones that I grade myself.
All right, very cool to have the key in or the tie into the start of PokéRich, and then speaking of PokéRich and the evolution of PokéRich, to kind of cap things off, where do you see yourself and Dom and you know, you guys vending for the next year or two, or like what is your future in this hobby look like? Are you in this forever now, full time? Do you want to do something more? Do you want to build something within this, you know, hobby? Kind of like, I'm really glad me and Jake started this podcast because this was something I've been thinking about forever, and I'm just curious, like, kind of where you see your growth or what kind of goals you have for your near future.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and thank you for having PokéRich on this podcast. When I say PokéRich, I'm talking about, you know, Dom, myself, all of us, and we love seeing, and thank you for all the content that you guys produce, because this is part of the hobby. You know, this is all the love, all the good stuff. For me and for PokéRich, for us, we're obviously going to continue doing what we do. I love it. I mean, this is a lifelong journey. Right. I'll probably be 60, 70, 80 with my Pokemon cards, and
same.
You know,
we talked about doing this podcast in our 80s.
Yeah. That's awesome. So that's going to keep going. You know, we're going to keep doing shows, and we love it. So there's that. We have other things. I've always had an idea, and this is like before when I was in high school and college. I was heavily involved with extracurricular, key club, student government, things like that. I spent like every single weekend planning events. Because I was a part of a lot of leadership roles, I probably participated and planned probably like over 1,000 events.
Y'all are good at that. Because,
Yeah.
you guys do the events at shows where there's like a mini thing that you guys run or facilitate
Right.
for the kids. And I see
Yeah.
that a lot with you guys.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've, Dom and I have talked about starting our own kind of like convention, things like that for cards. But right now, the focus is, creating a great experience for our, people who come to our table, everything like that.
Gotcha.
That's our biggest priority right now. So,
Hit us up so that Card Lounge get a table at your show.
Oh, yeah.
yeah, let's do it.
For sure.
Well, thank you so much, PokéRich. But before we leave off, can you tell our viewers where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you could find us on Instagram or YouTube as well. Instagram is going to be poke.rich. And then on YouTube, it's going to be at the PokéRich or our website, thepokerich.com.
Nice.
You guys heard it. If you guys have any vintage stuff at all, especially the rare stuff, take it up with Rich. He knows where to pick it up from. So thank you again for having you on the podcast.
Yeah,
Thank you guys. You guys are
Thanks for
awesome.
joining
Let's
us.
go.
Thank you guys.
And thanks for lounging with us, everyone.